Hello, BookTube. As you've seen, if you've been watching this channel, Matthew at Mayberry Book Club and I, a fellow booktuber of mine, are doing read-alongs every month. Having a great deal of fun, just picking books. I'm doing a lot of the picking, but that's okay. Just reading through them. Everything is fair game for us. It doesn't matter what it is. And for the month of September, we've gone back to comic books. We've read a few comic book collections, graphic novels. And we've gone back to that for September. We're reading another comic book that is seminal. It is a major landmark work. It will be reprinted by DC Comics forever. It will make its writer and artist a mint of money. It's been highly influential on the floppy comics, on all the comics that came after it. And it's Kingdom Come by the writer Mark Waid and the artist Alex Ross. And I am astonished. I was astonished once we realized that we were going to do this thing. I was astonished to frantically search Hyde Cottage and realize that I don't actually have a physical copy of this collection, nor do I have e-copies of any of these issues. So I need to rectify that. I need to rectify that right away. I need to get a copy of my own of Kingdom Come. This came out in 4 issues, so it lends itself perfectly to a monthly read-along. And it is, as you can see up in the corner there, an Elseworlds story. That is the technical designation that also would apply to another comic that we read, Batman Dark Knight Returns. An Elseworlds story is when a writer and artist are giving free rein on DC properties, and it is not part of continuity. It never works out that way. Never. If an Elseworlds story is really popular, then suddenly all the workaday writers of the monthly comic grind start to shape those stories. They start to shape the precursors of those stories. It's very, very, very annoying. It happens not just with Elseworld stories in DC, but in any future history story in Marvel Comics, the competition for DC. The future of Marvel Comics and for the next 100 years in the lives of the characters is virtually carved in stone, and was so 40 years ago when the writer Chris Claremont and the artist John Byrne did a 2-part story set in the future. All of a sudden, lesser writers thought they needed to shape events towards that future, like it's the only one that could possibly happen. That is one of the long knock-on effects that Kingdom Come had. But for now, we can talk about just the comic itself. We're reading one installment at a time per week for the month of September. And the first installment introduces us to a radically changed world. It has been 10 years since the DC superheroes that the whole world knows. Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Green Lantern, The Flash. It's been 10 years since they last operated in the bright light of day, since they last were known and revered and active, publicly active. And in the meantime, the world has not lacked for super beings. There are still plenty of superpowered beings, but they're no longer along a strict dichotomy of good and evil. Instead, they just wreak havoc. It's basically, imagine the 2 warring street gangs with superpowers. So there's lots of property damage, presumably lots of loss of life, including a key seminal event that is recorded in the first issue of this miniseries, where a character, you hesitate to call them heroes, a superpowered character named Magog, he and his team of superpowered characters are chasing down an old Superman villain named the Parasite. And in the course of that melee, a dumb superhero named Captain Atom is split in half. Basically, he is detonated. And it wipes out, the detonation wipes out all life, irradiates the soil of the heart of the American Midwest. And Magog and his teammates, his one remaining teammate, the 2 that survive, they are able to contain the radioactivity, so the United States doesn't become uninhabitable. But it's a signal event that mankind no longer trusts what they call metahumans. The age of heroes appears not only past, but almost forgotten. And Alex Ross is a great artist in his renderings here, and in a lot of Mark Waid's writing, it seems like a lot more time has passed than just 10 years. The characters seem physically decades older, not just 10 years older. And we open up with our main character. let me give you his name is Norman. Oh, right. In this graphic novel is dedicated to Christopher Reeve, who makes us believe that a man can fly. How fantastic! How fantastic is that? Uh, but we open up uh, with two old men at a bedside. Norman McKay is a pastor, and this old man is Wesley Dodds. Comic book fans, when they read this, recognize right away. Wesley Dodds was a World War II DC superhero called Sandman, and apparently, in the meantime, in the century since he was the Sandman, he's gained the ability to have prophetic visions, and he sees that a gigantic apocalyptic event is coming. He doesn't specify, as apocalyptic predictions never do, and he dies. But before he dies, he transfers those prophetic visions to Norman McKay, who suddenly now has them. He's just an ordinary, unassuming, decent, suburban pastor of a normal, bored congregation. Suddenly he's preaching fire and brimstone revelations. And we get an instant, right in the first 2 pages, the Sandman, that is his old World War II costume with a face mask. He's giving Norman McKay, he gives him his Bible, and passes along the ability to have visions. And over Norman's shoulder, we see a glimpse of the wreckage that the world has become. These buildings are wrecked, and there are shadowy flying figures, superpowered figures. And nobody seems to think much of it. He's not looking out the window alarmed. It seems to be a part of his day, and we soon learn that it is a part of his day. Fallen statuary. A chintzy Planet Krypton restaurant, where the only echo that we have of the great superheroes of DC Comics are these dumb servers who are dressed as them. And more importantly, we see that the world is full of chaos. Look at this. Norman McKay is walking along the street and barely gets missed by a flying car. Because these superpowered beings are constantly rumbling in the streets. And it's almost impossible to tell who's supposed to be the good guy and who's supposed to be the bad guy. They're just constantly fighting each other with no sense of rationality or proportion at all. And it's just the normal thing. It's just the normal way that things. See, there Norman McKay saves the little girl, but he doesn't think, "Oh my God, this has never happened before," and he doesn't like it. It's a dystopia. Like, do you want to come up here, baby? Come on. Oh, there you go. Like the beginning of Dark Knight Returns. Who are you yelling at? Who are you growling at? Like the beginning of Dark Knight Returns, we are opening on a dystopia. It might be sunny, and Norman McKay might have a normal life to lead, but it's a horrible world. Things are destroyed all the time, there's property damage all the time, and no one can control these metahumans. These children, as we're told, the children and grandchildren of the great figures of the past. No one can control them. Because all of the great heroes have gone. They have disappeared from the public eye. And Norman McKay is thinking about that when he receives an amazing visitation. Look at this Alex Ross artwork. Stepping out of the stained glass window is the World War II superhero, the Spectre. Pale skin, long green cloak, long green hood, whose origin story basically is that he is the avenging angel of God. He's one of DC Comics' omnipotent characters. He actually was part of the superhero team during World War II, the Justice Society of America, with a couple of other omnipotent characters. Here, he explains to Norman McKay that he is feeling divorced from humanity in a way that makes him need an anchor in the human world. And that anchor will be Norman McKay, who has suddenly Wesley Dawes' prophetic visions. That's what draws the Spectre to him. So the Spectre takes him on a journey. They go to the American Midwest, but as Norman McKay immediately realizes, it can't be the Midwest, because the Midwest is a radioactive hellhole. But that's what it looks like. And as they get up closer, they see this figure. He's working on a barn. But Norman McKay says he seems vaguely familiar, and that's because the figure is Superman, who's hiding away on a farm here. Comic book fans they're all through this thing, all through these 4 issues are little hints for comic book fans to really, really love. Like, for instance, that you might think, well, that's just any dog, but no, that's Crypto. You might think that's any horse. Well, maybe it's the super horse. And then in the background, you can't really make it out. there's a monkey. Because Alex Ross wants you to know that he is including Super Dog, Super Horse, and Super Monkey. But Superman is brooding and alone. He's got gray in his hair. He's got a beard. And he doesn't seem concerned with the chaos in the outside world. You'd think that'd be the first thing to interest him. But other people want him to be concerned, foremost being Wonder Woman, who has not aged. Of course, she's an immortal Amazon princess. And she comes to Superman. She calls him Clark. And he doesn't like that. That's the look on his face. He doesn't want people to call him Clark anymore. He wants to call him Kal-El. She tries to tell him that truth and justice used to mean something to you. She reminds him what he already knows, which is that Midwest that Norman McKay knows is impossible is actually holograms. It's a holographic emitter. That it's just a fantasy land that Superman is living inside in his Fortress of Solitude. The Fortress of Solitude that has all of these trophies and whatnot. She invites him to look at the news, and we see how Superman looks at the news. Floating 100 feet in the air, looking at hundreds of channels all at once, in every language on Earth. That's how Superman looks at the news. That is just Alex Ross at his most genius. At his most genius. Little details like that. Wonder Woman recounts for him the event that happened that irradiates Kansas and Iowa and Nebraska. And she tells him, Cal, please, our generation takes its lead from you. We always have. You must face this. If you don't, neither will the rest of us. And it just goes on. And the reason why he doesn't seem to want to is because he seems to have a complicated history with Magog, the main helmeted guy, this guy, that caused that explosion. They seem to have a long history. And Wonder Woman leaves the Fortress of Solitude. Look at that artwork. Just incredible. Just amazing. Look at that artwork. There she is, soaring into the air past the statue of Jor-El and Kara and Lara, Superman's parents, holding up the model of the planet Krypton. And there, I mean, only Alex Ross would think to have the Northern Lights be the border that separates her from the Spectre and Norman McKay who are watching her. Amazing. Little details like that are just amazing. Norman McKay wants to know what happened to the rest of the heroes. It makes sense that the public wouldn't know. The Spectre shows him. The Flash is still active in Central City, running constantly. And you'll notice the character design is not the bright red costume with the yellow lightning bolt like you'd expect from Silver Age Flash or the Flash on the TV or the Flash on the movie screen. Instead, there's a tip-off for Alex Ross and Mark Waid for their visual iconography, and that is the winged helmet, which is familiar from FTD Flores here in the United States as the helmet of the god Mercury, the god of speed. But more importantly for DC Comics, it was also the winged helmet that was worn by Jay Garrick, the original World War II era Flash. And it opens up the idea that maybe this is just a kind of Flash, a kind of a Flash who is all Flashes, so that we don't need to worry about which incarnation of the character we're thinking about. So if we don't need to worry about that, maybe this is just one original Flash. Or, more intriguingly, maybe this is Jay Garrick, just evolved into this speed being. And look at that image, just flashing around the city. He's everywhere all at once. We see that Hawkman is patrolling the Pacific Northwest, making sure that despoilers of the national habitat get punished. And he's not wearing a mask anymore. He has a hawk's head. It's not Carter Hall wearing a hawk mask. Pretty impressive and an interesting design, but it immediately sets this out as an Elseworld story. That character doesn't exist in DC continuity. So why DC writers would so slavishly try to make this happen when they don't even have the same characters, I do not know. I'm going to try not to kvetch about that for the whole month. We also have Green Lantern, poised far above Earth in a green citadel that his ring has made. And he looks old. He looks much older than test pilot Hal Jordan would be if after only 10 years. Seems a lot more likely that this is Alan Scott, the original Green Lantern from the World War II era. And there is a good, I don't think I have an example on the cover here. No, I don't. There's good visual iconography later on in the issues that it is Alan Scott. Alan Scott's ring is different from the Green Lantern rings of Hal Jordan, the space ring, the science fiction element. And Hal Jordan, those Green Lantern rings that you might be familiar with have a vulnerability to yellow. They cannot affect anything yellow. Whereas Alan Scott's ring had a vulnerability to wood. It couldn't affect anything wooden. So lodge that in the back of your mind for later when we access my conspiracy theory about whether or not this is the original Green Lantern. And we learn in brief panels the fates of some of the other iconic heroes. We get a great glimpse of Atlantis, where Aquaman must have just withdrawn. We get a great look at Paradise Island, where Wonder Woman has largely withdrawn. Clark Kent tells her, go back to your island. You'll be safe there. And much to my heart's delight, we get a glimpse of the future. Look at that panel. Isn't that incredible? That is Superboy and Supergirl leading a flotilla of the Legion of Superheroes in the 30th century. Such an amazing image. That is so incredible. Where they just went to the future. They don't visit the future anymore. They just go there. And maybe most pivotally of all, certainly the one that all the fans are going to want, what about Batman? And it turns out Batman has turned Gotham City into an armed protectorate. There is no crime because the whole city is patrolled with these mechanical bat creatures, these mechanical bat droids that hunt down crime and keep the criminals penned in. So Gotham City has not gone out of control. And we're going to hear about that in the next issue, directly from Batman. But the Norman McKay the Spectre shows all of this to Norman McKay, and it actually infuriates him. These people are still there. Why are you showing me this if they're refusing to help instead of unable to help? He says, why show me? And the Spectre says, this disturbs you? And Norman McKay says, yes, you're an angel. That makes you a messenger of hope. And the Spectre says, at no time did I promise hope. And Norman McKay says, a greater power sent you. Your very existence is a testimony to faith. You mean that all you have to tell me is that those who could save us won't? For those who call themselves heroes now share a silent guilt. Look around us. They're worse than before. They're not acting out of boredom. They're acting with abandon. And violence has erupted around the two while they're talking. Norman McKay is chewing out the Spectre, saying, before Kansas, that's the disaster I mentioned, they at least had some grasp of responsibility. Now they don't even have that. Nothing matters. They're following Magog's reckless lead, and they're out of control. Wonder Woman was right. The madness will go on and on. Don't you understand? If any of us are to survive, any of us, now more than ever, we need hope. And the instant he says that, there is a familiar blur in the air. That's all we see at first. The good guys and the bad guys are getting their chronometers cleaned. The falling cable car is being saved with a spout of water, and you can't even see the thing that's moving, but everybody knows. It hasn't been that long. Everybody knows. As Norman McKay is narrating here, he says, even before the bystanders freed themselves from the cable car, they knew. We all did. We knew and remembered. And we get the classic call-out from The Adventures of Superman, my very favorite TV show. Look, up in the sky. And then we get the reveal panel, this thing that Alex Ross is justifiably famous for. No words, just Superman. In his costume, only there's no yellow behind the S, there's black instead. He's older. He looks like, he has the body type of George Reeves, the Superman from the Adventures of Superman. But he has come back. There's bright, bright sunlight on him. A bright red cape floating in the air. And the crowd goes wild. Here it was. The crowd goes wild. They're so happy to see him. He's a prayer answered. He's someone bringing order back to this chaos of metahumans all over the world. But Norman McKay sees something else. He sees that although this might originally have been thought to be the ultimate fulfillment of Wesley Dodd's vision, this is the apocalypse averted. Instead, Norman McKay sees that it's just begun. This is not the apocalypse averted. This is the beginning of the apocalypse. And that is how the issue ends. With that, with Superman back. Superman has finally listened to his own inner conscience and to Wonder Woman and has come back. This was the 2-page spread cover for the first issue. And there you have the Spectre on the back cover, but you've got all these people that you don't recognize, these weird vigilante-type creatures that you don't recognize. You don't know them at all. Some of them look a little familiar, but not really. Whereas the cover for the second issue, let me flash forward to that, because that's what we're going to be doing next week. The cover for the second issue is very different. These are more recognizable characters. Superman is right in the middle there, but you've got lots of others, too, that you can kind of sort of draw a bead on. And that's what we'll be doing next week. What happens when Superman returns? How does that change the world? And how ominous is it that it isn't the end of the apocalypse? I just love this dedication. I just love it. So that is the first part of Kingdom Come by Mark Waid and Alex Ross, a classic comic that we will be reading throughout the month of September. So we will be doing the second chapter next week. I urge you to read along. This is a lot of fun. This is a seminal work. I will be pointing out a lot of details without trying to get too insider baseball. And it's also incredibly accessible because, A, you know these characters, right? You know Batman and Superman and Wonder Woman. Everybody does. And B, since DC Comics, this was a hit for DC Comics. Right from the first issue of the original 4 issues, this was a hit. And then it was brought out in a comic book, and it was an even bigger hit. It's been brought out in elaborate hardcover slipcase editions. It's been brought out in hardcovers like the one I thought I owned. It's been brought out in a million. There are new covers all the time. If Alex Ross can be prevailed upon to draw a new cover, he's done 4, I think, then that's reason enough to reprint Kingdom Come. It happens all the time. And as a result, this will be in your library. No matter how small your library is, no matter how snobby they may be towards graphic novels, if they have any, they'll have this one. So you could follow along, and I'm sure that Matthew would agree with me that we urge you to do so. We're having a lot of fun reading this story. What would happen if the titanic, iconic heroes of the DC universe, what would happen if the world caught up with them, the world they made? Because keep in mind, a point that Wade doesn't stress here, because I assume if you're a comic books fan, you already know it. A point he doesn't stress is that reality, superpowered beings knocking cornices off, throwing buses around, endangering people, that is already the reality in DC and Marvel Comics. The reality is already that if you're a normal person, your life is in danger all the time from these beings. Think about a comic book that you read. Just pick up a random back issue of a DC or a Marvel comic book. The superheroes, the good guys, the iconic people who care about the ordinary person, are demolishing buildings, tearing up streets, pulling down lampposts all the time. It happens all the time. So it's not just these random chaos actors at the first issue of this series. That is something that Wade is reflecting on just in general. But he's putting it on their shoulders and sort of implying that Superman and his cohort of heroes never did any of that stuff. They, of course, did do that stuff. But what would happen if they were older and disillusioned and needed to come back and get the world in order again? That's what we're going to start to see in the next issue. So I urge you to read along, catch up and read along, and I will see you then. Thank you for